Gassers didn't disappear because people stopped loving them. They disappeared because professional drag racing changed. In 2008, NHRA asked fans to vote on their favorite race car of all time. The candidates included John Force's championship-winning funny cars, Don Garlett's revolutionary rear-engine dragsters, and decades worth of pro-stock machines. The winner was a 1941 Willys coupe that last turned competitive laps in 1966. That car belonged to Stone, Woods, and Cook, and it beat out every modern racing machine in a landslide vote. The result tells you something important about what drag racing fans actually remember. They don't remember clean runs and consistent elapsed times. They remember spectacle. They remember cars that looked like they were about to explode at any moment. They remember the gassers. So if the passion never died and these cars are still running today, what happened back in 1972 when NHRA officially eliminated the class? Why did one of the most beloved forms of drag racing vanish from professional competition for over 2 decades before the nostalgia movement brought it back? The answer involves a fuel ban, a corporate sponsorship war fought in magazine advertisements, the arrival of purpose-built race cars, and fans who wanted more smoke and fire than gasoline engines could provide. To understand what killed the gassers in professional competition, you first have to understand what they were. The name gasser came from the fuel they burned. In the early days of organized drag racing, NHRA created separate classes for cars running on gasoline versus cars running on nitromethane or methanol. The fuel burners were faster, but the gas classes had their own following because these cars looked like something you might actually see on the street. And in the early years, some of them actually were driven on the street. The original NHRA rules required gassers to be dual-purpose vehicles. They had to be self-starting, carry working headlights and taillights, have a functional horn, and be capable of driving on public roads. Some early racers genuinely did drive their gassers to the track, race, and drive home. As the class evolved and the cars got faster, that practice faded. But in the beginning, these really were street machines that pulled double duty on weekends. The gas coupe and sedan classes, which everyone shortened to gassers, required production-based bodies with closed tops, no convertibles, no roadsters. Weight breaks determined which class you ran in, from A gas at the top down through H gas at the bottom. Add a supercharger and you moved into the A-gas supercharged division, which became the premier gasser class by the early 1960s. That dual-purpose requirement lasted about 5 minutes once racers figured out how to find loopholes. The rulebook said you needed upholstery and seats, so teams installed the lightest possible materials. Thunderbird bucket seats were popular because they met the letter of the rules while saving weight compared to bench seats. Door panels got thinner. Headliners disappeared. By the mid-1960s, the street legal requirements existed mostly on paper. Top A-gas supercharged cars might technically have working headlights, but nobody was driving a 700-horsepower, high-standing Willys through Los Angeles traffic. The cars had evolved into purpose-built race machines, wearing a thin disguise of street legality. The distinctive gasser stance came from necessity, not style. Tire technology in the 1950s and early 1960s hadn't caught up with engine development. You could build an engine that made serious horsepower, but getting that power to hook up at the starting line was a constant struggle. Racers figured out that raising the front end transferred more weight to the rear tires at launch, improving traction. The physics were simple even if the execution was complicated. When a car accelerates hard, weight shifts rearward. The higher you raise the front end, the more weight transfers to the rear tires during launch. More weight on the drive wheels means more traction, which means faster times. So they jacked up the front suspension using solid axles, usually from 1932 Fords or trucks. The stance got higher and higher as competitors searched for every advantage. By the early 1960s, top gassers sat so tall they looked like mechanical praying mantises ready to pounce. Headers exited through holes cut in the front fenders because there was no room under the hood for traditional exhaust routing. The effect was dramatic and slightly terrifying. These cars didn't just go straight. They wiggled, they wheel stood, they fought their drivers every inch of the quarter mile. Part of what made gassers so entertaining was watching skilled pilots wrestle these barely controllable machines down the track. Every run was different. Every launch was an adventure. The bodies themselves evolved toward lighter and shorter platforms. Early gassers used whatever the builder had available, which often meant fat-fettered Fords from the late 1930s and 1940s. But racers soon discovered that the compact Willys coupes offered significant advantages. The Willys Overland Company of Toledo, Ohio, had a complicated history. Founded by John North Willys in the early 20th century, the company struggled through the Depression years producing small, economical cars that few people wanted to buy. The 1933 through 1942 models featured four-cylinder engines and minimal features designed for budget-conscious buyers. These were commercial failures in the showrooms, but 20 years later, those same cars became the most valuable bodies in drag racing because their lightweight construction and compact dimensions made them perfect racing platforms. The 1933 Willys had a wheelbase of around 100 inches, compared to over 112 inches for a typical 1940. Shorter wheelbase meant quicker weight transfer. Lighter curb weight meant better power-to-weight ratio. The boxy shape actually helped at drag racing speeds because it created less lift than sleeker designs. They also looked mean as hell sitting jacked up with a supercharged big block stuffed between the frame rails. By 1960, Willys coupes became the dominant body style in supercharged gasser racing.
The man who really kicked off the Willys era was George Montgomery from Dayton, Ohio. In 1959, Montgomery showed up at the NHRA Nationals in Detroit with a baby blue 1933 Willys powered by a supercharged Cadillac engine. He won the A-Gas class and Little Eliminator, setting a national record of 128 miles per hour in the process. Montgomery wasn't a flashy character. He let his cars do the talking. His approach to racing was methodical and engineering-focused, constantly refining and improving his equipment rather than seeking publicity. He owned George's Speed Shop in Dayton, which became one of the oldest continuously operating speed shops in the country. His powder blue Willys went through constant evolution. The original Cadillac engine was eventually replaced by a supercharged small-block Chevrolet when Chevy power began dominating the class. Later still, Montgomery switched to a Ford 427 SOHC Camry when Ford came calling with sponsorship money. Montgomery kept winning. He took the Nationals again in 1960 and 1963, then added a fourth victory in 1969. Between 1959 and 1968, he won 8 NHRA national titles. When he passed away on August 24, 2023, at age 90, tributes poured in from across the racing world. He was the king of the gassers, and nobody who saw him race ever forgot it. But Montgomery had help reaching the top. The NHRA nitromethane ban, which took effect on April 1, 1957, had created perfect conditions for gassers to thrive. The fuel ban is often blamed on NHRA President Wally Parks, but the real story is more complicated. A group of track promoters concerned about rising speeds and insurance costs pressured Parks into accepting a ban that he didn't initially support. In early 1957, a meeting was held in Los Angeles involving several California drag strips. The promoters agreed to prohibit not only nitromethane, but also methanol, and in some cases, even superchargers. The precipitating event was a run by Emery Cook, who clocked 166.97 miles per hour at Lyons Drag Strip in his nitro-burning roadster. That speed terrified the track operators, who were already worried about insurance costs and the potential for catastrophic accidents. The tracks agreed to the ban, and Wally Parks, despite his personal reservations, went along with the decision because NHRA couldn't function without the cooperation of the track operators. For the gasoline classes, the ban was a gift. Suddenly, the gas coupes and sedans weren't competing for attention with fire-breathing nitro cars. Supercharging development accelerated because it was the only way to make big power without exotic fuel. The NHRA nitro ban lasted until 1964, giving gassers 7 years to build their audience without competition from the fuel classes. Within this environment, the legendary rivalries of the gasser wars took shape. On the West Coast, Fred Stone and Tim Woods had built a successful gasser operation running Oldsmobile engines. Stone managed Woods' construction company, and they shared a passion for racing. Their driver was K.S. Pittman, one of the first racers to campaign a Willys in the gas classes. After a promising start, Pittman left to run his own operation in early 1961. Stone, Woods, and Cook needed a new driver. They found Doug Cook, who everyone called Cookie, a talented mechanic and wheelman who had been campaigning his own small-block Chevy-powered gassers. Cook joined the team after the 1961 Winter Nationals, and Stone, Woods, and Cook was born. The arrangement was perfect. Stone and Woods provided the money and handled the business side. Cook did the driving and the wrenching. The partnership would last through the peak years of gasser racing. Their 1941 Willys, nicknamed Swindler, became the most famous gasser in history. The candy blue paint, the tuck-and-roll interior, and the immaculate preparation set a new standard for what a gasser could look like. Stone, Woods, and Cook went on to become the first gasser team to break into the 10-second zone, the first to break into the 9-second zone, and the first to exceed 150 miles per hour. By 1965, they were running mid-nines at close to 160 miles per hour. The team was also historically significant for another reason. Stone, Woods, and Cook were among the earliest African-American figures in competitive drag racing. In an era when motorsports was almost entirely segregated, Stone, Woods, and Cook competed against anyone and beat nearly everyone. Their presence in the winner's circle challenged assumptions about who could succeed in motorsports. Their main rival was Big John Masmanian, a massive Armenian-American from East Los Angeles who stood 6 feet 5 inches tall and built some of the most beautiful race cars ever to turn wheels. Masmanian was born on May 18, 1926, and excelled at football at Garfield High School before the attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. He enlisted in the Navy and served in the Pacific, where he sustained shrapnel wounds during the battle for Leyte Gulf. Before he was even old enough to drive legally, he had rebuilt a 1932 Ford body into a highboy roadster for an auto shop class. That early experience with fabrication and engine building laid the foundation for everything that followed. Masmanian's candy apple red 1941 Willys was as much a show car as a race car, with brilliant crimson paint, chrome-plated everything, and immaculate detailing that made it a favorite of magazine photographers. Every piece that could be polished was polished. Every line was perfect. In 1964, Masmanian's Willys made the cover of Hot Rod magazine after becoming one of the first stock-bodied cars to run a 9-second quarter-mile. His driver, Bones Bullock, pushed the 467 cubic inch blown Chrysler Hemi through the traps at nearly 150 miles per hour. The engine was reportedly making over 800 horsepower. Toy maker Revell released a scale model of his Willys, and it became one of their best-selling kits for years. Kids across America built replicas of Big John's car in their bedrooms. When Masmanian passed away on July 21, 2006, at age 80, he left behind a legacy that continues to influence gasser culture today.
The rivalry between Stone, Woods, and Cook and Big John Masmanian fueled what became known as the Cam Wars. The camshaft manufacturers realized that gasser racing was perfect for advertising their products. Every week, these cars appeared in the pages of Drag News, National Dragster, and the monthly Hot Rod magazines. If your favorite driver won with a certain Cam Grinders product, you wanted that same cam for your own car. Ed Iskandarian, known as the Cam Father, sponsored several top gasser teams. Jack Engel ran a competing operation out of Southern California, sponsoring Stone, Woods, and Cook, among others. Howard Johnson of Howard's Cams was another player in the sponsorship wars. Each manufacturer ran provocative advertisements, taking shots at their rivals and celebrating their sponsored drivers' victories. The trash talk was legendary. Stone, Woods, and Cook became Pebble, Pulp, and Chef in rival ads. Big John Masmanian became Big June. Ohio George Montgomery earned his nickname from these advertising wars. Headlines like "Big June all shook up over losing the big one to SWC" became regular features in the weekly drag racing tabloids. Dub Cook later admitted he didn't like the campaign at first. He thought the name-calling was unsportsmanlike. But when they saw how the controversy drove fan interest in match race bookings, everyone became enthusiastic participants. The advertising battles drove match racing bookings to unprecedented levels. Promoter Ben Christ organized tours featuring Masmanian, Cook, K.S. Pittman, Ohio George Montgomery, Junior Thompson, and other top gassers, sending them from track to track in multi-car shows that sold out wherever they appeared. The year 1964 is generally considered the peak of the gasser wars. Stone, Woods, and Cook needed 2 cars running simultaneously because match race demand was so high. One car would be racing in California while the other was on the East Coast. At that year's Winter Nationals, the rivalry came to a head. Stone, Woods, and Cook faced Big John Masmanian in a showdown that fans had anticipated for months. The format was a best of 3. When the decisive run came, Masmanian's Willys struggled, while Cook had cut a perfect light and pulled away for the victory. The crowd went crazy. Stone, Woods, and Cook had vindicated all the trash talk. Within weeks, both teams had switched to Chrysler Hemi-Power, abandoning the Oldsmobile engines they'd used for years. The arms race was accelerating. What nobody realized at the time was that 1964 was also the beginning of the end. Several factors converged to doom the gassers in professional competition. The first was the return of nitromethane. After years of pressure, NHRA began allowing fuel back into competition at the 1963 Winter Nationals as an experiment. By 1964, nitro was fully back on the NHRA national event schedule. No matter how spectacular a 9-second, 150-mile-per-hour gasser run might be, it couldn't compete with a 6-second, 200-mile-per-hour fuel dragster for sheer shock value. The second problem was the emergence of the funny car. The first funny-looking cars appeared in 1964 when Chrysler built a trio of Dodge 330 Max wedges with altered wheelbases for drag racing. By 1966, funny cars had evolved into flip-top fiberglass machines running on nitromethane. They were faster than gassers, louder than gassers, and they shot more flames. A gasser running 150 miles per hour was exciting. A funny car running 190 was terrifying. Fans wanted terrifying. The third factor was the NHRA rule change that allowed late-model cars into the gas classes starting in 1967. When gassers switched to Mustangs, Camaros, and Corvettes, they looked like slower versions of funny cars. The unique visual identity that had made gassers instantly recognizable was gone. Ohio George Montgomery understood immediately. He switched from his iconic 1933 Willys to a fiberglass 1967 Mustang. The new car was faster, but something was lost. Stone, Woods, and Cook made the same switch, building a 1966 Mustang called Dark Horse II. In September 1967, Doug Cook was involved in a high-speed crash at Alton, Illinois, when an experimental rear spoiler caused the car to become airborne at 180 miles per hour. The crash destroyed the car and left Cookie with back injuries that ended his driving career. Big John Masmanian had already moved on, abandoning his beautiful Willys for a chop-top Austin he called the Football. In 1968, he built a candy apple red Barracuda funny car that won the manufacturer's funny car championships. The Willys era was effectively over.
The fourth and final blow came from NHRA itself. In 1970, NHRA created Pro Stock, a new class for production-based race cars running on gasoline. Bill Jenkins debuted his lightweight Chevy Vega at the 1972 Winter Nationals and won 6 of 8 national events that year. But Pro Stock was designed for late-model machinery, not 30-year-old Willys coupes. In 1972, NHRA made it official. The gas classes were eliminated from the national event schedule. The surviving gasser entries were absorbed into Competition Eliminator. For practical purposes, the professional gasser era was over. The men who had defined the class moved on or retired. Doug Cook lived quietly after his crash, helping with his son Mike's racing efforts until his death on June 16, 1999, at age 66. Fred Stone passed away in 1982. Tim Woods retired from his construction business and from racing. K.S. Pittman, the fierce competitor who had started it all, continued racing in various forms until his death on January 31, 2024, at age 82. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The gassers refused to stay dead. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, enthusiasts kept the cars alive at small tracks and local events. Mike Cook, Doug's son, rescued the final Swindler A Willys when it was headed for the crusher. He raced it himself for several years, then restored it to its original Gasser Wars configuration in the late 1970s. Today, it sits in the Wally Parks NHRA Motorsports Museum. In October 2001, a group of East Coast enthusiasts officially formed the East Coast Gassers. Their mission was simple: preserve and race period-correct gassers the way they ran in the 1960s. Then came the Southeast Gassers Association, founded by Quayne Stott, with a vision that many said was too strict to work. His rules were brutal: no electronic fuel injection, no modern traction control, no automatic transmissions, pre-1967 body styles only, technology frozen at 1967 specifications, hand-lettered car names on the doors. They even turn off the scoreboards during racing, leaving the outcome to the eye test, just like the old days. When 7 cars showed up to that first Southeast Gassers event at Greer Dragway in South Carolina, Stott knew he was onto something. Today, the association draws fields of 30 or more cars, attract thousands of spectators, and even caught the attention of Mattel, who produced a Southeast Gassers Hot Wheels line. The Ohio Outlaw Gassers, the Nostalgia Gassers Racing Association, the Mid-Atlantic Nostalgia Gassers Association, and others have followed suit. Rocky Perrone maintains beautiful recreations of the Big John Masmanian and K.S. Pittman Willys, bringing them to events across the country. Fred Bear, now in his 70s, still campaigns a period-correct gasser. Young fans who never saw the original Gasser Wars are building tribute cars. Fathers are restoring gassers with their sons. The live streams of nostalgia events draw viewers from around the world. So, why do gassers still matter after all these years? Part of it is the accessibility.
In the 1960s, gassers represented something that regular guys in regular garages could build. You didn't need a factory-backed racing program or $1 million budget. You needed a cheap old Willys, a blown engine, and enough determination to figure out how to make it all work together. Part of it is the unpredictability. Modern professional drag racing is incredibly consistent. Top fuel cars hit their marks within hundredths of a second, every pass nearly identical to the one before. Gassers are the opposite. They wheel stand, they drift, they smoke the tires at half-track. Every run is an adventure for both the driver and the spectators. But mostly it's about what these cars represent. They're a direct connection to an era when drag racing was as much about personality as performance, when fans felt like they knew the drivers personally, when racing was dangerous enough to matter, but accessible enough that anyone with talent and courage could compete. The original gasser wars lasted barely a decade, but their impact on drag racing culture has now stretched across more than 60 years. Pro stock struggles to fill grandstands, while nostalgia gasser events sell out. That tells you everything you need to know about what fans actually want to see. The gassers never really disappeared. They just went underground for a while, kept alive by dedicated enthusiasts who refused to let an entire era of motorsport history fade away. Now they're back, louder and more popular than ever in the nostalgia scene. The same cars that dominated the 1960s are running again. The same names are on the door panels. The same spirit of barely controlled chaos that made the gasser wars legendary is alive and well at tracks across America. So, the next time someone tells you gassers are dead, point them toward the Southeast gassers, the East Coast gassers, or any of the other nostalgia organizations keeping the flame burning. Then remind them that in 2008, drag racing fans voted a 1941 Willys their favorite race car of all time. Not a top fuel dragster, not a funny car, a gasser. Some things never really go out of style. If you enjoyed this deep dive into gasser history, make sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Drop a comment below and let us know what topics you want us to explore next. What era of drag racing should we cover? What legendary drivers deserve their own episode? Your suggestions shape what we create. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.